When you embrace the call of our adventures, you'll find that spirit in yourself. Dare to live every moment. Live Boricua.
Navigate through shipwrecks, artifacts, and history in the landmark Jim Cress Maritime Lighthouse Tower at the Door County Maritime Museum. Explore beautiful Door County on every floor. A must-see maritime experience on the working waterfront of Sturgeon Bay.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
Next time, after a woman calls to report a murder, she's found close to death.
They got her heart going, but she's still unconscious.
The only people who could have done it have alibis.
We were all in here watching a film.
Was she phoning us about her own murder?
Death in Paradise.
Saturday at 8 on WTTW.
I'm Norma.
And I'm Gary. And you're watching WTTW Chicago.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight.
Right now, America's fighting on two fronts.
Inflation and the Russia-Ukraine war. President Biden addresses that and more during his trip to Chicago.
This kind of thing does have echoes of the way that Speaker Madigan exercised his power.
Did Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch use clout to help out his wife's judicial campaign? We have an exclusive report.
My body, my decision. My body, my decision.
A Senate vote on abortion and much more with our Spotlight Politics team.
Northwestern University announces a first-of-its-kind long-term lung study. A look at who they're recruiting for the research.
Our mission is to create artwork about places worth preserving.
A husband and wife duo aims to prove with their artwork that there is no place like home in Chicago.
And a piano prodigy from Ukraine finds solace in music and in the community he found in Chicago. But first, some of today's top stories. The Chicago Park District now has a permanent CEO. The Park District Board is appointing Rosa Escareño to the post. Escareño was serving as the agency's interim leader as it was dealing with a sexual misconduct scandal involving their lifeguards. She replaces former CEO Michael Kelly, who resigned in the fall after officials said he mishandled the investigation into the scandal. In a statement, Mayor Lori Lightfoot says, quote, "This approval is proof of the hard work, dedication, and commitment Superintendent Escareño and her team have demonstrated these past few months to the Chicago Park District and throughout her more than 3 decades of experience serving our communities." A pair of mass shootings on the city's south side leaves 1 teen dead and 10 others wounded. Police say the teen was killed in a shooting in the Back of the Yards neighborhood yesterday afternoon. Investigators believe it was the result of escalating gang violence in the area.
Unfortunately, though, the level of violence that we experienced last night is just beyond what's even reasonable, or there's no reason for it, but even what we've seen in years past, it's unacceptable, especially given the level of effort that's been put into the community by the 9th District and Commander Jerome and our organization and other organizations like ours to improve the quality of life in our communities.
Another mass shooting occurred later that evening in Jackson Park, where 6 people were struck. 2 were hospitalized in serious condition, and others suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Today's White Sox game against the Cleveland Guardians is being postponed. The reason? Multiple positive COVID-19 tests within the Cleveland organization. It's the first MLB COVID postponement this season. The league will provide a rescheduling update when it becomes available. Up next, President Biden is back in Chicago. What he was up to right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
President Joe Biden was in Chicago today on a campaign-style visit. At the several stops he made, Biden addressed arguably the biggest challenge facing his presidency right now, the surge of inflation caused in part by the Russian war in Ukraine. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with a look into Biden's whirlwind trip to Illinois. Starting, Heather, with when he landed at O'Hare and was greeted by Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. Mayor Lightfoot noticeably absent. How come?
Well, she is on a 5-day trip to Texas involving both political and official business, so she was far away from the Prairie State today, even though the president was in town.
And Biden then headed to O'Connor Farms in Kankakee, where he spoke about his plans to fight inflation and praised America's farmers. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Farmers, you feed America. You got us through a pandemic. And you're literally the backbone of our country. It's not hyperbole. But you also feed the world. And we're seeing with Putin's war in Ukraine, you're like the backbone of freedom.
Heather, what did the president say about his plans to fight inflation?
Well, he said that the trick to fighting inflation is basically to increase production at home. And part of that is involves increasing the production of wheat and other crops. Now, Ukraine was once the breadbasket of Europe, but of course now there are literally tons and tons of silos of grains that nobody can get to because of the conflict. And the president said today that he was working with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack to essentially make it easier for farmers to plant more than one crop and to increase that production, which will help bring down food prices and inflation.
Sure, that would perk up the ears of all the farmers here in Illinois. And from there, it was back to Chicago, where he spoke to the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers National Convention. Lightfoot might not have been there, but the president mentioned a conversation that they had. So take a look.
Mayor Lightfoot talked about how Chicago has lead service pipes, more lead service pipes and drinking water than any other city in America, affecting nearly 400,000 Chicago homes. And guess what? That lead causes brain damage, particularly to kids in those pipes. The law is going to fix that because every American deserves to be able to turn on a spigot and drink clean water.
And as I understand, he got a very warm reception at the IBEW convention. What else did he talk about?
Well, he really delivered quite a barn burner of a political speech, praising unions for, as he said, bringing him to the dance. Of course, they were essential to his successful 2020 campaign. He was also slashingly critical of the former president, whom he did not mention by name, but referred to him as the, quote, great MAGA king. Of course, that refers to Make America Great Again. He also took direct aim at Florida Senator Rick Scott's plan, which he said would increase taxes on all Americans and threaten Social Security. And of course, he talked about his tragic backstory about how his first wife and baby daughter were injured in a car accident and how he really believed that he was working to make America the place that helped him recover and that where all Americans can thrive.
And finally, Heather, it was a fundraising trip for the Democratic National Committee. He raised some funds here in Chicago for them. Does that say that maybe Chicago could have a leg up on hosting the DNC in 2024?
I don't doubt that all of the people at that fundraiser are bending the president's ear about their desire to bring that convention to Chicago in the summer of 2024. I'm sure he's also hearing about Illinois' pitch to be one of the first 5 primaries in that presidential contest. So Illinois very much in the national spotlight today and perhaps for months to come.
All right, Heather, thanks very much. And, of course, we'll see you again later in the program for Spotlight Politics. Thanks.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And up next, questions over House Speaker Chris Welch's clout in a judicial campaign. So please stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/dailybriefing and sign up.
Primary elections are a month away. Often overlooked are the races for judge. One Cook County district is getting attention because of the eye-popping campaign contributions one of the candidates has received from Democratic state lawmakers. The candidate is Shantae Rains Welch, who happens to be the wife of Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch. Paris Schutz joins us now with the latest. Paris.
Brandon, Shantae Rains Welch is an attorney and a partner in private practice. She is running for judge in the Cook County 4th Judicial Sub-Circuit. That is a newly created district on the western edge of Cook County that encompasses towns like Hillside and Western Springs. And as you said, she is the wife of Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch, who took over that position from disgraced former Speaker Mike Madigan. She has heavily outraised her opponents and can thank some of her husband's colleagues for that. We've learned that Chris Welch asked Democratic House members if they'd contribute to his wife's campaign, and many of them stepped up and delivered. According to campaign disclosures, elected Democratic representatives have donated more than $200,000 from their campaigns into Rains Welch's campaign. $155,000 of that came last Friday alone, and those donations include, as seen here, State Rep Greg Harris with $50,000, Marcus Evans $47,000, Elizabeth Hernandez $25,000, Jahan Gordon Booth $25,000, on down to Lou Lang, who is retired, with $20,000. And Representative Harris, who is retiring himself at the end of this term, told us simply, quote, "I got asked if I could help out, so I was happy to do so. The Speaker asked, and you can say yes or no." Another state rep, Marcus Evans, told us that he donated on his own volition. Quote, "We're friends, independent of Chris Welch. I just believe in her personally and believe in having black women as judges." Now, we spoke with the executive director of the watchdog group Reform for Illinois, who told us that this is one of those things that does not necessarily cross any legal lines, but does raise ethics concerns given Speaker Welch's powerful position.
There's very possibly totally innocent explanations. Lots of times candidates ask friends and colleagues for money, or their family members will ask friends and colleagues for money. The difference here is you basically have a sort of boss-employee relationship between the speaker and his members. And so how would you feel if your boss asked you for money for your wife's campaign or for your wife's charitable effort in some way? You would feel a lot of pressure to hand over that money, and that creates a complicated relationship.
Paris, what's been the response from the Rains Welch campaign?
Well, a spokesperson for that campaign did not directly answer this question, but sent a statement saying, quote, "The Shantae Rains Welch campaign is building a broad and enthusiastic coalition of supporters, volunteers, and donors, including elected officials, for whom we are deeply grateful for their energy, time, and financial support that they have invested in this historic 4th sub-circuit race." This is not the first time that questions have been raised about donations in this race. The Sun-Times reported last month that she received $10,000 from a hospital company that benefited in a change in state law pushed by Speaker Welch that allowed them to reopen the long-shuttered Westlake Hospital in Melrose Park. Rains Welch subsequently returned that donation, acknowledging it was illegal because a judicial candidate cannot take out-of-state donations per state law. And these questions of clout and influence come as former longtime House Speaker Mike Madigan is under indictment as part of a 22-count alleged corruption scandal involving ComEd. Illinois Democrats signaled their desire to move on from the ways of the past, but Reform for Illinois wonders how much they really have.
Speaker Welch and Speaker Madigan are two different people with two different leadership styles. But certainly this kind of thing does have echoes of the way that Speaker Madigan exercised his power and demanded loyalty both in the legislature and at all levels of government. We want to be vigilant to make sure that no one in the speaker's position or in any position in Illinois can exercise that type of power again.
And Rains Welch is running against 3 other candidates in that district: Jerry Burrito, Patrick Campanelli, and Chloe Peterson. Peterson has a clout connection too. She is the niece of Cook County Clerk Karen Yarborough. And we tried to reach out to Speaker Welch and a campaign spokesperson multiple times through calls and messages. We did not get those returned.
Okay, a lot for voters to think about as they head to the polls next month. Paris, thank you. Up next, details on a first-of-its-kind lung study. Stay with us.
Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
It's a first-of-its-kind study to help find the root causes of chronic lung disease. Northwestern Medicine is recruiting millennials aged 25 to 35 to take part in the study. More than 40 cities across the country are participating in hopes that it might one day better prevent lung disease. And joining us to discuss this groundbreaking research are Harold Wimmer, National President and CEO of the American Lung Association, Dr. Ravi Kalhan, Deputy Division Chief of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine and a Professor of Preventive Medicine at Northwestern, and Lindy Olive, one of the study's participants. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight. Dr. Kalhan, we mentioned that this is a first-of-its-kind study. What makes it so significant?
Well, thanks for the question, Paris. There are a couple things that make it really significant. The first one is that we've never really attempted to study respiratory or lung health in a comprehensive way in the United States. We actually have learned a lot over the past many years about heart disease and cancer, and it's a product of conducting studies like this, an observational study across the lifetime of participants to try to understand what determines who develops a certain condition, in our case, chronic lung disease, and who's resilient to developing those conditions. The other really unique thing is this is the first and only study of millennials in the United States. We're recruiting 20 to 35-year-olds, and they've never been studied in any of our epidemiologic cohorts to date. And this population, this generation, has unique health behaviors, unique viewpoints on their health, and the opportunity to understand the intersection between how they approach their lives and how that affects their health is really exciting for us.
All right, Harold Wimmer, so on that point, why is it important to study millennials, and how do you factor in things like geography, whether or not someone lives close to polluted air, or whether or not someone has asthma or something like that?
Well, I mean, all of those factors are really going to be important for this study. And for that reason, we have more than 39 institutions that will be participating through the American Lung Association's Airway Clinical Research Center network that our organization operates across the country. And Northwestern is the first center that is kicking this study off. And Dr. Kalhan is one of our principal investigators. And by, studying millennials, it's really looked at that, individuals in this age group should be at the point where they have the healthiest lungs. And so that's why it's important to start with this group, millennials, in order to study and to follow them over a period of time.
And Lindy Olive, you're one of the millennials that will be followed over a period of time. Why did you want to get involved in this research?
I wanted to get involved in this research because I have reflected on my lung health history over the past couple of months, especially after I had COVID, and realized that my lungs had been through so much over my life. Just in the past 3 years, I had worked in a factory where I was exposed to plastic dust. And then I lived at the intersection of a landfill and an arsenal or an army base. And then I got COVID. And all of those things I feel like could have long-term impacts. However, we don't know because we don't have the data yet. And being a part of this study means that we get to really understand what those things could mean over a long term.
Dr. Kalhan, how did COVID impact your study? Because as I understand, you did want to get started on this before COVID, and obviously it pushed it back a bit, but now it might factor into the study majorly.
Yeah, it's really important, actually, Paris, because COVID-19, if you think about it, is perhaps the greatest threat to health that this generation of millennials has faced to date and might face throughout their lifetime. The fact that it's a respiratory infection and we don't know all the consequences. Even when it's a mild acute COVID illness, we don't really know the long-term consequences on the lungs and breathing over time. Really makes it a key exposure that we want to study in addition to environmental exposures, air pollution, whether someone vapes or smokes, whether they're exposed to secondhand smoke, workplace exposures, all these other things. But now COVID and respiratory infections have really emerged as an important exposure for us to take a look at.
And Harold Wimmer, I wanted to bring up the notion of vaping and smoking. How does that factor into this study?
Well, you know, throughout history, we know that smoking tobacco is a risk factor to lung disease. But what we're really looking for through this study is to identify the current and the future risk factors. And the American Lung Association is very interested in learning more about the risk factors that are associated with vaping and also the inhalation of cannabis. You know, these are just two examples, along with the impact that climate change could have on the lungs. So, you know, there's a number of current and new risk factors that we're excited about really better understanding the impact that it can have on the lungs.
And Lindy Olive, you mentioned some of the risk factors you worry about. What is this study going to entail for you? What are you going to have to do over the next 5 years?
Well, I've already done the baseline study, which included an in-clinic assessment, including a CT scan, a nasal swab, which was kind of similar to getting a COVID test, a urine sample, and then we also had a lot of questionnaires, which is where the occupational and residential environmental components come in. And then there's also a spirometry component, which kind of measures your lung health. And we do that assessment at home over the phone. And I will do that, I think, every 4 months. I don't know how much longer, I'm not going to lie, for a while.
All right. Well, I'm sure you'll go confirm that. And Dr. Callahan, what is 5 years enough to really get a sense of long-term effect on all of these factors in contributing to lung disease?
No, it's not. You know, Paris, this study, which is funded by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, is funded for a 5-year period to form this cohort and establish the baseline. It's our goal and objective in partnership with the Lung Association to follow these individuals the rest of their lives. So we plan to use this cohort to seek further funding, keep in touch with Lindy until she's well beyond being a 25 to 35-year-old and really understand over the lifetime the risks that are presented by current exposures and behaviors.
So, Harold Wimmer, is it fair to say our scientists have a better idea of what causes heart disease, what causes obesity, and they just don't have the same kind of long-term research on lung disease?
That's exactly it. And as Dr. Callahan has really ingrained in my head is that this study should really be what the Framingham study was for heart disease, for us to really determine the cholesterol of lung disease. And I really like when Dr. Callahan used that analogy. I mean, it really hit home. And in terms of the importance of the work that's going to be done over the next 10, 20 years in following our participants.
All right, important research, and we'll have to check in with all of you over the next several years. And our thanks to Harold Wimmer, Dr. Ravi Callahan, and Lindy Olive for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. A local music prodigy began studying in his native Ukraine before he moved to Chicago with his family. The community of musicians he found here, and music itself, have helped sustain him during an uneasy time. Producer Mark Vitale has the story of an aspiring concert pianist with a lot on his mind and a lot of support.
At Evanston's Nichols Concert Hall, a former church, a high school senior plays one of Prokofiev's war sonatas.
I feel very impacted by the Prokofiev's First Movement Sonata because it was written during the Second World War, and it really is very dramatic and powerful, and I can imagine, you know, tanks rolling in, rockets, bombs. It's just really overwhelming.
17-year-old Miroslav Mikhailenko is in the Academy program of the Music Institute of Chicago, an elite group of just 35 musicians among the nearly 2,000 students.
Miroslav's a remarkably unique pianist as part of our Academy program. One of the things that I think really draws people to great performers is the story behind the individual.
I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, and I moved to the United States just 4 years ago with my family. All my memories from Ukraine are very dear to me. I think they really shaped me as a person, as an individual, and a performer. The war has created a great deal of anxiety for me, knowing that first, my extended family is still in Ukraine, and second, that both of my uncles are actually serving right now in the Ukrainian military and defending my country. So we're praying for them.
At the Music Institute, he's found support among his peers. To lift his spirits, the student orchestra performed Ukraine's national anthem with Miroslav on piano.
That performance with our orchestra playing my national anthem, it really stirred me up to do even more for my Ukrainian community, and I think it really healed me from, you know, anxiety and worry that I had before.
I think he's doing very well, and I think the nice thing is there's a great community of Ukrainians here in the Chicago area, and he's gotten the support of that. Music is a great way to kind of help work your way through really tough and difficult times.
I want my audience to be really captivated and captured by what I play, and to be honest, one of my goals is to make my audience cry when I play a very emotional piece. So this would be my goal for the future. The war has really put a strain on me, as well as my family and all the Ukrainian people, all people around the world. We really hope that the war will end soon.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And Miroslav graduates high school next month, and he just found out that he's been accepted into the prestigious Peabody Conservatory. And while he doesn't have any public performances scheduled at this time, the Music Institute of Chicago this weekend hosts 2 concerts at Nichols Concert Hall. There's more information on our website. Now, Paris, back to you.
Brandis, thanks very much. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, unhappy alder people say the pace of approving the new Chicago casino is reminiscent of the parking meter deal. That and more in Spotlight Politics. And meet a couple who creates works of art out of works of architecture to show there's no place like home in Chicago. But first, some more of today's top stories. Drug overdose deaths in the U.S. hit the highest level on record last year. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 107,000 people died of drug overdoses last year. That's a 15% increase from 2020's once record-breaking number. In Cook County, 2021 also surpassed the previous year's data with over 1,900 opioid-related deaths. The city is expanding its lead service line replacement program, but the initial effort has been slow to start. The expansion will allow all Chicago households earning less than 80% of the area's median income to qualify to have lead service lines removed from their home for free. However, since the replacement program was initially unveiled in September 2020, crews have replaced just 54 of the approximately 400,000 lines responsible for contaminating Chicagoans' tap water, according to data obtained by WTTW News. Since it launched, officials have received a total of 886 applicants for the program, but just 262 have been approved. My Chemical Romance, The Misfits, and 9 Inch Nails are the headliners for this year's Riot Fest. The festival will take place at Douglas Park September 16th through the 18th. Other acts include Sleater Kinney, Ice Cube, Bleachers, and Sunny Day Real Estate, among many others. 3-day tickets are on sale for $300 and single-day passes are on sale for $100. And now back to Brandis for a look at a new documentary about the dinosaur apocalypse. Brandis.
Paris, it's now widely accepted by scientists that most dinosaurs died out roughly 66 million years ago as the result of a massive asteroid impact. It hit what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula and changed the history of life on Earth, paving the way for the rise of mammals. Now, an international team of researchers say they found fossilized remains of fish and a dinosaur in North Dakota that they believe died on the very day of the asteroid impact. That story is told in a new documentary called Dinosaur Apocalypse, airing on WTTW later this evening. Here's a short clip.
We're seeing it for the first time in 66 million years. I think we got ourselves a dinosaur.
Billion years later, joining us now to tell us more are Robert DePalma, adjunct professor at Florida Atlantic University and postgraduate researcher at the University of Manchester in England. DePalma is leading the excavation of the fossil site. And Philip Manning, professor of natural history at the University of Manchester and co-author of a scientific study of the excavation site. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Robert DePalma, let's start with you. And before we get to the details of this discovery, tell me about the Tanis site in North Dakota. I understand that you've been studying that site since 2012. What drew you to that particular location?
The Tanis site is just absolutely phenomenal, and it really amazes the whole team, my colleagues at Manchester and the other teams that have been involved, because it gives us an idea of basically a window into a snapshot in time that was pretty hazy before. You know, we knew that the asteroid came down. We knew that 75% of species went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, but to get things kind of at a day to hour scale, that was really kind of hazy in natural history. We don't really have a good idea of what happened during that time span. And Tanis gives us a much better idea of what occurred during those first moments after impact. It locks those in time. And Tanis has the first known mass death assemblage of vertebrate carcasses that are directly attributable to that impact event.
And what is that location like now? And what would North America and the Tanis site have been like, 66 million years ago before that asteroid impact?
We're talking like night and day. Right now, you're out on the North Dakota prairie. You've got crumbly rocks and precipices out there. You've got prairie grass, rattlesnakes, and you've got negative 40 weather in the wintertime. Now, it's very different. Back then, it was a tropical to subtropical paradise. You had cypress trees and alligator ancestors. And you had dinosaurs all over the place. It was thriving with that life right up until the moment of impact. And it would have been a very nice place to visit if you could kind of imagine that in your mind.
Someplace for vacation, perhaps. Philip Manning, I understand, the fossils that have been found there are in layer of deposits where everything's sort of, as Robert said, all jumbled up, haphazardly deposited. What does that tell you?
Well, first thing, I've got to say thank you, because you said most of the dinosaurs went extinct. I really appreciate that, because, of course, their descendants, the birds, are still with us today. Thank you. That was a big thing for me. But yes, this wonderful collection of life, which has been bundled into a very discrete package, which, as Robert has so eloquently said, is very time constrained. We know it happened on this day when this object smashed into the planet. So there's so much information that we can peel from this, because we've got advances now in science that allow us to use imaging technology to literally pick apart the chemistry that holds these objects together, not only today, but there's echoes, just hints of what they were composed of when they were alive some 66 million years ago. So there's so much information we can now extract from these wonderful fossils.
So we know that the team has made some extraordinary finds, including an exquisitely preserved leg of a dinosaur that you all believe died on the very day of the asteroid impact. And we have some video of you exposing that fossil. Here it is. So we hear the voice of Sir Richard Attenborough voicing over there. Robert, back to you. Tell us about this evidence that you found that leads you to believe that that dinosaur died on the day of impact, and how were you able to tie your finds, so precisely to that moment?
I think that Sir David and I are both equally in love with that specimen because the preservation is absolutely exquisite. And it's that preservation that gives us an idea of when this animal died. The leg is still inflated. It's three-dimensional. And we have skin impressions and articulated bones inside. So what that tells us is that before this thing was buried in the surge mud, it did not have time to decay. The muscles did not have the advanced decay and liquefaction that occurs when you have a long period of a lead time before burial. So we're talking, if this animal did not die on that day, it died perhaps at maximum weeks prior. Most probably, based on the exquisite preservation, it probably did die on that day, in which case it would have experienced what I like to say is a front row seat to the worst day of the Mesozoic.
And as you were speaking, we were looking at some pictures of fossilized fish from that time period as well. Tell us a little bit about some of those finds as well, please.
The fish are probably the first thing that got us excited about the site, because from the moment that the site was brought to our attention by Steve Nicholas and Rob Sula, the commercial team that was there before us, when that torch was passed to us, we thought it was the best thing because fish like that are unknown in the Hell Creek. There were only a handful before that site. So to put together the early evolution of those fish, this site was key. And when we looked a little bit closer, we got a bigger surprise because in the gills of most of those fish are little blobs of molten glass that came out of the sky. They're called ejectospirals, and they were blasted from the crater. These are a type of asteroid impact debris, and they were sucked into those gills by the fish as they were desperately trying to get oxygenated water in that massive surge. So those fish absolutely died that day. They were part of that event. They were part of that surge. And I can't begin to imagine what sort of turmoil they went through that day.
And of course, I should correct myself and say the right Attenborough. It is David Attenborough. Philip, I'm going to come back to you. There are some skeptics of these claims who say that there needs to be more research done before they'd be willing to accept the interpretation of what we think the Tanis site represents. What is your response to those skeptics, and what convinces you that this is indeed a historic find?
I'd persuade folks to go and read the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences paper, or the one published in Nature Scientific Reports. There's lots of lovely data there to start with. And the nice thing is about some of the fossils we're looking at from this site, which are beautifully time constrained by these previous papers, it looked like a dinosaur. If you saw a chicken running down the road, you say that's a chicken. You might need a chicken breeder to tell you what type of chicken, but it's a chicken. This is a dinosaur. And there are multiple wonderful remains found in the site. And if folks need to read a paper to tell them it's a dinosaur, they're in the wrong business.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Robert DePalma and Philip Manning for sharing this information with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Dinosaur Apocalypse airs tonight on WTTW starting at 9. Up next, our Spotlight Politics team recaps the president's visit to Chicago. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
President Joe Biden hits town as a historic abortion vote is taken on the floor of the U.S. Senate. All that and much more in tonight's Spotlight Politics. Joining us now are Heather Sharon and Paris Schutz. Welcome back, gang. So, the president hit Illinois to talk about inflation and supply chain struggles. Take a look at what he said this morning.
America is fighting on two fronts. At home, it's inflation and rising prices. Abroad, it's helping Ukrainians defend their democracy and feeding those who are left hungry around the world because Russian atrocities exist.
So, Paris, President Biden trying to blame the Russian war in Ukraine for inflation, high gas prices. Is that message resonating?
Well, it's certainly a message the president and Democrats hope resonate with voters. And there is truth to the notion that the conflict in Ukraine is heavily impacting inflation, although in the campaign, this is issue number one as midterms approach, notwithstanding what happens with Roe v. Wade. And Republicans have been and will be laying all of this at the feet of the president as they look to take back the House and the Senate. So the president, like he did today, is going on the trail to hammer home the message that, hey, I'm trying to do something about inflation, but remember, it's due to factors beyond our control.
Heather, president's at a union convention and then on to a high-ticket fundraiser with Governor J.B. Pritzker. Will those funds go towards bolstering the Democrats in the midterms?
They absolutely will, and it will give a chance for Illinois officials like the governor to bend the president's ear, like I said before, on bringing the convention to Chicago and making sure that Illinois is in the mix for the presidential primaries in 2024, but also to make sure that Chicago and Illinois gets a good chunk of that infrastructure bill that the president spent a good deal of time talking about today. And because that is really going to be key, because politicians love ribbon cutting, especially in the months and weeks leading up to an election day.
Absolutely. Paris, Mayor Lightfoot, though, she's in Texas today. I mean, wouldn't she want to get some FaceTime with the president when he's in her hometown?
You would think. I mean, it's unprecedented as far as I know. Every time I remember the president coming to town, a mayor of Chicago has been there to greet the president. Now, the mayor's team says that this was a pre-planned trip to Texas before they knew that the president was coming. It's a fundraising trip, but you'd think they might be able to postpone it for a day. And as a Chicago resident, you want the mayor to be in the president's ear and have the president on speed dial and talk about the concerns of Chicago. And, hey, how about give us some funding for crime or funding for infrastructure, things like that. That's a lost opportunity. I mean, going all the way back, there are these great tapes at UIC that a phone call between LBJ and Richard J. Daley where LBJ is on the phone saying, we're going to get you your money, Dick, for the trolley to O'Hare. I mean, that's what you want the mayor doing, haggling the president for Chicago's needs. Big lost opportunity today.
Heather, the U.S. Senate today took a symbolic vote on abortion as Governor Pritzker pushed federal lawmakers to protect abortion. What happened today in the Senate?
Well, the Democratic majority tried to push through a bill that would not only codify Roe versus Wade, but also sought to ensure that women who wanted an abortion could get an abortion. And it won the support of 49 Democrats, all but West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, but no Republicans, which doomed its passage. Even if the bill had been able to win 50 votes, however, it would have fallen victim to the filibuster because there are not 60 votes to end the legislative filibuster, leaving Democrats pretty much in the same place as they were before they took this vote and waiting to see what the Supreme Court ultimately decides.
Meanwhile, Mayor Lightfoot earmarking $500,000 in city funds for abortion access. Tell us about that, Heather.
Well, that money is coming from the budget for the Chicago Department of Public Health. It will be given to organizations that are already working to ensure that women who need reproductive health care can access that care. Sometimes people need help with a ride or a hotel room or other medical services, and that's what organizations are really concentrating on, especially as they prep for an influx of patients seeking reproductive health care in Illinois and Chicago. If Roe versus Wade is overturned, as everyone expects, it will likely be banned in Missouri and Indiana, leaving Illinois the only option for women looking to get an abortion.
So the new ward map, this is going to be a good one. It's being blasted as the latest backroom deal, but an expensive referendum has been avoided. Paris, is anybody happy with the outcome here?
Well, I'll tell you who should be unhappy with the outcome, and that's every single resident of Chicago, because as you look at this, it looks like a complete mess, a complete cobbled together mess that was all about preserving power, you know, and you've got wards that make no geographic sense. They carve up neighborhoods. We've talked about over the past several years about how that's bad for representation. A neighborhood like Englewood has been carved up into 6 wards. So how do residents get development going, and who do they go to for their alderperson? And once again, in the new map, it's carved up into 6 wards again. And then we're going to talk about the 36 wards. So beyond being, you know, African-American caucus versus Latino caucus, there's that 36 ward, which that's Grand Avenue. That makes no sense at all. I mean, it's basically a throwaway ward. But this is about backroom deals, alder people cutting deals to map out potential opponents and to solidify their power. Mayor Lightfoot broke her promise on this early in her candidacy. She told us she was into a people's map. She was nowhere to be heard on that. And reform aldermen who were elected, who wanted to do things differently, they were nowhere to be seen on that. Not one of them stuck their neck out for a people's map that made more sense on a neighborhood basis. They engaged in the same kind of old school backroom dealing that has been going on for decades here, and it looks like it's going to be the same old, same old.
Meanwhile, it seems like Alderman Gilbert Villegas, who led the Latino Coalition map, was retaliated against with a noodle-shaped map. Heather, is this retaliation?
Well, Paris asked Alderman Jason Irvin, the chairman of the Black Caucus, exactly that question. Alderman Irvin said, no, it's not payback. It's just how it worked out. And I think that this map has clear winners and losers. Villegas lost, Alderman Rabin Lopez lost, and so did Alderman Silvana Tabares, whose 23rd ward now does not include Midway Airport and is shaped like a backwards C. And this we've seen for decades. Like Paris said, this is always the once-a-decade opportunity for incumbent aldermen to protect their re-election prospects and to punish their enemies and help their friends. And even though everyone promised that this year was going to be different, that the city was finally ready for reform, I think Paris is right when he says this is just like we've seen in previous decades.
I mean, this is the definition of public officials choosing their voters as opposed to the other way around.
So, former alderman and political science professor Dick Simpson, he's out with another corruption report. Heather, does this backroom map deal support what he found?
Well, Chicago is again the #1 city for corruption in America. It is for the 3rd year running. Now, Illinois is the 3rd most corrupt state, so I guess we have something to work up for. And most of these convictions were centered around 2 big scandals. Of course, the scandal that enveloped and forced House Speaker Michael Madigan from office. He's now been indicted and pled not guilty. And also the scandal surrounding the state's red light camera system. A firm, Safe Speed, is accused of bribing really just dozens of officials to get that through the General Assembly, and those combined to keep Chicago in that #1 position.
Okay, so on the campaign trail, Republican attack ads are airing at a fast and furious pace. Take a look at the latest commercials from gubernatorial candidates Richard Irvin and Jesse Sullivan.
It was pretty disgusting what he did. Jesse Sullivan repeatedly implied he's a combat veteran, knowing full well he was not in the military.
Did not serve in combat. He was a social worker.
It's a slap in the face.
Richard Irvin is not telling the truth.
Irvin's attack ad on Jesse Sullivan's service in Afghanistan is downright disgusting.
Totally false. As a veteran, it's offensive and pathetic. Here are the facts. Jesse Sullivan was an Army civilian deployed by the Department of Defense to Afghanistan.
So, Paris, what's going on here?
Well, it's really confusing here. I mean, there's an attack on Sullivan's ostensible military record and then an attack on that attack. But the issue here is Sullivan has had pictures of himself in military gear in his campaign paraphernalia, and he did go to Afghanistan, but he was a civilian. He was there in more of a social work capacity to help Army efforts there, but he was not an official member of the Army, so he can't really call himself a veteran. So Irvin's calling him out for that, saying, you know, you lied about your military service. I don't think he lied. He just kind of maybe obscured the truth on that a little bit. Irvin did. He is a veteran. He did serve in Operation Desert Storm. So again, you know, kind of going after each other's military record or ostensible, but you know, there's so much money here from different billionaires, and the mud is just flinging.
Well, Heather, let's talk about that. Big money at play in this particular primary. Remind us who's funding these ads and these candidates.
Well, Richard Irvin is the beneficiary of the largesse of Ken Griffin, who is, of course, the hedge fund billionaires of the Illinois' richest man. And he has put, at this point, $45 million toward Irvin's campaign. But he's not the only billionaire involved. Dick Uihlein, who is the office goods billionaire, is supporting a PAC that has been putting ads out for Darren Bailey, who's also running. And our friends over at WGN this afternoon put out a poll today that showed it really being a 2-person race between Bailey and Irvin. Bailey trails Irvin, despite all of the billions, by just 4 percentage points. So I think you're going to see a lot more of these ads because that is a very close race.
So, you know, before we run out of time, we've got to talk about the casino because some older people are complaining that this whole process is moving too quickly and that it's reminiscent of the infamous parking meter deal. Heather, are they sore losers or is history repeating itself?
Well, it's really hard to know because this is a massive development, $1.7 billion that will reshape the River West and River North areas, and the mayor is determined to push this through before the end of the month. There was a second city council meeting scheduled today. The city council was already scheduled to meet on May 23rd. It will also meet again on May 25th. That will prevent any opponents of the casinos from using a parliamentary procedure to delay a approval of the casino. It is not clear, I think, whether the mayor actually has those 26 votes, because nobody wants to face re-election just in less than a year, having approved anything that looks anything like that much loathed parking meter deal. But there is a lot of pressure from unions and the Lightfoot administration to get this done, because it will mean tens of millions of dollars for the city. And apparently the city is again cash strapped next year.
Well, and to that point, Paris, does Lightfoot need this casino jackpot to bolster her heading into the election in 20 seconds?
Absolutely. I mean, it'll be a huge boost for her reelection. Heather mentioned all the unions that love this. Maybe she gets labor's endorsement because of this and all the jobs that it creates. It provides a great narrative, and that's probably why the mayor's trying to fast track this.
All right, we'll see. Of course, that's Spotlight Politics. Heather Sharon, Paris Schatz, thank you. Up next, Chicago takes center stage in art that's made by a husband and wife duo. But first, a look at the weather.
Among the many changes, the Great Fire of 1871, of course, wrought in Chicago was its architecture. The city, once built mostly from wood roads, again constructed from fireproof brick and stone. The change in materials also brought about new housing styles like bungalows and three flats. The husband and wife team behind a Ravenswood art studio believe the home styles that define Chicago's neighborhoods are worth not only preserving, but immortalizing in the art they create. Producer Erica Gunderson brought us this story late last year, and here's another look.
We're transplants to Chicago, but when we met, we would just walk the neighborhoods and look at all of the homes and buildings, and we just felt like we were in awe of the architecture here.
Our city's towering skyline gets all the press, but for artists Katie Laufenberger and Phil Thompson, it's the vernacular styles that make Chicago a place worth calling home.
With Chicago, it's like the whole city, just like border to border, it's just beautiful. For me, Greystone's kind of my favorite home type. You got the bungalow, you've got the workers' cottage. Those particular, especially ones that are kind of unique to Chicago styles, like really make the city sting.
Many have been charmed by the bungalows, three flats, and cottages that line Chicago's neighborhoods, but the husband and wife team behind Wonder City Studios have made that charm their business. And they say it's a business that could only make its home in Chicago.
I feel like the reaction that we get to our work here is just so special that you can just tell it really resonates with people.
The couple met in 2006 when both were in graduate school. Laufenberger was pursuing a fine arts degree, and Thompson was studying international relations. Thompson credits Laufenberger with inspiring him to take the leap into making art his business.
Drawing was always something that I loved to do ever since I was a kid. It just never seemed like that was a good career path. So I think meeting Katie kind of opened my eyes to like some possibilities. We go to galleries together and art shows, things like that. And so she kind of got me back on the art track.
Thompson began making commissioned illustrations under the name Cape Horn Illustration in 2018. This year, Laufenberger took the leap herself. She left a job in digital media and returned to art full-time, creating custom ceramic planters of Chicago homes.
It just really seemed like a natural thread that I could start doing ceramics of architecture as well, since we both love it so much. And I just find that people really love functional pieces that are beautiful and that they identify with, but also serve some use around the house so they can enjoy.
I think she has a much harder job than I do, like figuring it out, because like I don't have to worry about the back of the home.
Yeah. I like to add washes of color just to add some depth and richness to it, but I definitely like to let the natural clay shine through whenever I can, mimic the look of the brick.
They grace the combined enterprise with one of Chicago's many nicknames.
That sense of wonder is how We felt like we engaged with the city, and so it just really resonated with us.
As Wonder City Studio, Thompson and Laufenberger, with some help from their dog Vincent, offer prints that capture not only the city's home styles, but Chicago landmarks and neighborhoods, and even a few selects from other lesser cities. Their primary line of business comes from commissions for home portraits and planters.
It could be for a young couple that's moving into their first home. It's very touching to kind of know that you're helping commemorate somebody's memories and that they're going to have this piece in their family potentially for years to come.
What you almost always have is they tell you a story. Like, this was my grandmother's home. Sometimes it's just overwhelming when you feel like you get to connect with somebody like that, and that's really what art is, right? It's just really special.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Wonder City Studio sells their prints and ceramics on their website. They'll also be at the Renegade Craft Fair in Andersonville later this month. You'll find more information on that on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Inside an effort to document and preserve a classic form of affordable housing in Chicago.
And we visit the proposed short-term Bally's Casino site, the Medina Temple in River North, as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. And we leave you tonight with some more from local music prodigy Miroslav Mihalenko. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Wednesday night on PBS, starting with nature.
It was the sheer beauty of the egg that prompted in many people questions about their biological perfection.
Followed by a new episode of Nova.
I think anybody who's ever